I was peeling off my gloves after a 12-hour night shift when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The fluorescent hallway smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee, and all I wanted was to see my kids asleep in their beds. Instead, a photo lit up my screen, a photo of their bedroom stripped bare. The caption underneath read, "Don't worry, we moved everything for you. The kids are in the basement now. Micah deserves the good room." My name is Maya Hartley. I'm a 31-year-old pediatric nurse and a single mom to 10-year-old twins Caleb and Sophie. For the past year and a half, we'd been living in my parents' house to get back on our feet. I thought it was temporary. I thought it was safe. But staring at that message, I felt disbelief crash into fury. Caleb's asthma, Sophie's clarinet practices, all of it suddenly shoved aside for the sake of one baby, my brother's golden child. I clenched my phone so tight my knuckles burned. That night, everything I believed about family began to unravel. When we first moved into my parents' house, I told myself it was just until I got back on my feet. The twins and I squeezed into one upstairs room. 2 twin beds, a narrow dresser, and a shelf of books were enough as long as we had each other. My parents said they were glad to help. They even promised the kids could decorate however they wanted, which meant Sophie's practice schedule for clarinet got taped proudly to the fridge, and Caleb's drawings lined the hallway. For a while, it almost felt like home. But the day my brother Darren and his wife Kara brought their newborn son over for the first time, I noticed a shift. My mom's eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. My dad cleared space on the fridge with a smile and pinned up the baby's daycare forms, sliding Caleb's watercolor sunset into a drawer. I told myself it was nothing that grandparents were allowed to gush, but Caleb's face crumpled when he saw the empty spot where his picture had been. Sophie fared no better. She had been practicing hard for her upcoming school concert. Every evening, she'd pull out her clarinet, careful to close her door, and play the scales her band teacher assigned. At first, my parents praised her dedication. Then came Micah's nap schedule. "Sophie, keep it down, the baby's sleeping," my mother would whisper, poking her head in. After enough interruptions, Sophie started practicing with her eyes on the floor, her notes barely above a breath. Watching her shrink into silence made my chest ache. Meals began to revolve around Darren's visits. If he was coming by dinner, it was steak. If not, it was leftovers. Caleb once joked that Micah should come every night so he could have dessert, but no one laughed. These weren't just small slights anymore. They were daily reminders that my children's joy and effort came second. I told myself to stay quiet to keep the peace, because we needed the roof over our heads. I worked long shifts and couldn't be everywhere at once. Having my parents nearby meant the twins were never alone. But lying awake at night between their beds, listening to Caleb's faint wheeze and Sophie's restless turning, I began to wonder what we were really sacrificing to stay. And deep down, I feared the answer. When Darren announced that their house needed renovations, I thought it meant a few repairs, maybe a couple of weeks with a contractor. Instead, he showed up with boxes stacked to the ceiling of his SUV and declared, "It'll only be 6 to 8 weeks. We'll just stay here until the dust settles." My parents didn't hesitate. They welcomed him and Kara with open arms, their faces glowing as if this were some blessing. By sundown, the living room was cluttered with a playpen, a swing, and piles of diapers stacked taller than Sophie. My mother cooed about how wonderful it would be to have the baby so close. My father carried box after box upstairs for Darren, while I silently folded the twins' laundry and wondered how long before our little room would feel like a closet inside someone else's house. That night at dinner, the shift became undeniable. My parents set the table with their good china, something they hadn't pulled out for years. Steaks sizzled in butter, while Caleb asked why we usually had soup or leftovers when it was just us. No one answered. When dessert came out, a warm apple pie with vanilla ice cream, I realized the rules had changed. The weekend after, we went out to the Bluebird Diner, a spot the twins loved for pancakes. We slid into a booth and the waitress brought Micah's mashed banana first, smiling wide at Darren and Kara. She didn't even take our order until Micah was settled, and when the check came, my father whisked it away with a grin. "I've got this, son," he said, ignoring my hand holding my wallet. When it was just me and the twins, I always paid my share. But that day, I covered our portions separately, sliding cash across the table while Caleb stared at his plate. Back at the house, our routines shrank to fit around Micah's naps. Sophie's clarinet was hushed to near silence, and Caleb was told to keep his markers capped so the baby wouldn't accidentally chew on them. My father shrugged off Darren's half-hearted promises to pitch in for groceries. "Don't worry about it," he said. "I'll handle the bills." Except I was already handling them, sending money each month to cover our share. Yet somehow, Darren's missing contributions weren't worth a mention. It was in these little shifts, the dinners, the diner, the whispered corrections, that I saw the truth take root. This house was no longer a place where my kids and I were welcome. It was a stage, and Micah was the star. The longer Darren and Kara stayed, the more invisible my children became. At the twins' school open house, I walked the hall, expecting to see Caleb's watercolor pinned with the rest of the fourth graders' art. Instead, his spot was blank. His teacher said my mother had picked it up to keep the hallway tidy. That painting, swirls of orange and purple, was shoved into a drawer back at the house. Caleb pretended he didn't notice, but his shoulders sank as though a piece of him had been erased. Sophie's silence grew heavier. She had been practicing for weeks, but every time she lifted her clarinet, Kara would place a white noise machine by Micah's crib and say, "He needs quiet." My mother echoed the same line. "Sweetheart, can you wait until later?" Later never came. Sophie began playing in whispers, her music so faint I could barely tell if it was practice or just air. Even Caleb's health wasn't enough to make them stop. One afternoon, I caught my father setting up an extension cord in the basement, preparing a corner for storage. "It's cool and dry down there, perfect for kids with asthma," he said. My stomach twisted. Basements in Ohio weren't dry. They were damp, smelling of earth and mildew. I'd spent nights in the ER with Caleb when his chest tightened. The thought of him sleeping in that air made my hands shake. Money became another battle. Each month, I sent my parents my share. But when diapers or formula ran short, my mother looked at me, not Darren, and asked if I could cover it just this once. It wasn't just once. It was every week. Darren's excuses were endless, waiting for his paycheck, unexpected expenses. My father laughed it off. That's what family's for. These weren't grand betrayals, not yet. They were small cuts, day after day. Watching Caleb tuck his inhaler under his pillow like a secret, or Sophie slide her clarinet beneath her bed, without a word, I realized something I didn't want to admit. We weren't just being overlooked. We were being pushed out. It was near the end of another 12-hour shift when my phone buzzed in my scrubs pocket. I slipped into the supply closet to check. Instead of homework questions, a photo filled the screen, the upstairs bedroom stripped bare. Bed's gone, dresser pushed against the wall. The caption read, "Don't worry, we moved their things downstairs. Micah needs the light and space more." Another image followed Caleb's inhaler tossed on a nightstand beside a humming dehumidifier, wires snaking across a damp concrete floor. My stomach turned cold. That basement had one tiny window and a musty smell that clung to the air. The place where my father stored old paint cans was now where my children were supposed to sleep. I texted back, "You moved them," where no response. My father finally replied, "Relax, it's fine. The basement is safe. We'll make it cozy." Cozy. As if mold and concrete could be softened with a blanket. I grabbed my bag, muttered an apology to the charge nurse, and bolted out of the hospital. The night air was sharp against my face as I sped through empty streets. Home wasn't home anymore. It was a place where my children had been pushed beneath the floorboards to make room for someone else. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely cut the engine. Upstairs, the nursery light glowed where my twins' laughter used to be. The front door creaked when I pushed it open, and the smell of damp earth hit me before I even saw the boxes. My mother appeared clutching a blanket. "You're home early," she said. Darren stood behind her, rocking Micah with a smug smile. I brushed past them and went straight to the basement. The twins were huddled at the bottom of the stairs, Sophie clutching her clarinet case, Caleb rubbing at his chest. The dehumidifier growled in the corner. "Why are they down here?" My voice cracked. Darren shrugged. "It makes sense. Micah needs space and sunlight. They're old enough to manage. They're 10, I snapped, and one of them has asthma." My father stepped in, holding an extension cord. "It's temporary." "Safe," I shouted. "You threw their lives into a basement so your grandson could nap in comfort." Aunt Lorraine appeared in the doorway, her mouth tight. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me she'd seen enough. I looked at Caleb pale under the light and at Sophie gripping her clarinet. That was all I needed. I turned back, my voice steady now. "Pack your bags." For a heartbeat, the room froze. My mother blinked confused. Darren's smile faltered. My father lowered the cord, but I didn't wait. I grabbed the twins' duffels from the closet, pressed them into their hands, and said, "We're leaving. Tonight." And we walked out into the night air that finally felt like ours again. Priya's porch light was on when we pulled into her driveway. It was nearly midnight, yet she opened the door before I even knocked. She took one look at the twins and pulled us inside without a word. She set up her spare bedroom with clean sheets and a small air purifier. For the first time that day, Caleb breathed easier. While the kids settled, Priya handed me tea. "I had a feeling this might happen," she said. She was right. 2 weeks earlier, I had signed a lease for a small 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital. It wasn't much second floor, small kitchen, but it had windows that opened wide and enough space for the twins to spread out. I paid the deposit with overtime hours and my tax refund, whispering to myself it was for someday soon. That someday had come faster than I imagined. I pulled out my phone and reread the landlord's email, "Move-in Saturday." Relief flooded me. At work, I'd arranged a shift change, cutting back on nights so I could help the twins adjust. The school counselor promised to update their bus route once we had a permanent address. Piece by piece, I had been building an escape route, not knowing exactly when I'd need it. Sitting at Priya's kitchen table, I realized how close I'd come to waiting too long. If that message hadn't arrived, Caleb might have ended up back in the ER. That thought filled me with rage and determination both. This wasn't luck. This wasn't charity. I had built a way out brick by brick. And now my children and I were walking through that door. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I remembered. She asked if we could meet at the park on Maple Street. I almost said no, but Caleb's eyes lit up at the mention of swings, and I couldn't take that from him. They were waiting on a bench near the duck pond. My mom clutched a paper bag, my dad held a frame. The twins ran ahead, laughter echoing across the grass, while I approached slowly, my guard already raised. Elaine handed Sophie the bag. Inside were chocolate chip cookies, the kind she used to bake when Sophie was little. My father unfolded the frame he carried, revealing Caleb's watercolor sunset pressed behind glass. "Thought maybe this belongs on a wall," he said, clearing his throat. It was something, but not enough. Darren and Kara didn't show, and I was grateful. My parents tried to explain, their words stumbling. "Micah's so young," my mom said. "We weren't thinking clearly. We thought it was temporary?" My dad nodded along, guilt flickering in his eyes. I listened, arms crossed, the twins climbing the jungle gym behind me. Then I told them the truth. This isn't about temporary. It's about respect. My kids deserve better. If you want to be part of their lives, you'll see them where they feel safe. Not in a basement, not in a house that chooses someone else over them. The silence that followed was heavier than any apology. But eventually, my mom nodded. My dad muttered, "We'll do better." I didn't forgive them, not fully. But I offered conditions. Visits in public places, boundaries they couldn't cross. They agreed, whether out of guilt or love, I didn't know. As we walked back to the car, Sophie nibbled her cookie, and Caleb hugged his framed painting close. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Moving day came with sunlight streaming through dusty blinds. Priya helped us carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs, laughing when the old steps groaned under the weight. The apartment was small, but it was ours. Caleb chose the bedroom with the bigger window. He taped his drawings along the wall, pressing each corner firmly. Sophie set up her clarinet stand by the closet, her first notes echoing into a space that didn't shush her. The sound was raw and bright, and I found myself crying quietly in the kitchen while unpacking mugs. That night, we sat cross-legged on the floor eating takeout pizza. The air smelled of cardboard and oregano, not mildew. Caleb leaned against me with his inhaler tucked safely on the nightstand. Sophie practiced her concert piece, her clarinet filling the room with confidence I hadn't heard in months. At the hospital, I slipped into a new role as a preceptor for younger nurses. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant stability and respect. I worked my shifts, came home tired but not defeated, and watched my children bloom in safety. My parents visited once, meeting us at the library. They watched the twins show off their new library cards, smiling awkwardly but trying. Boundaries held, and for the first time, I believed they might last. One evening, after Sophie's rehearsal, we walked home under a sky streaked with pink and orange. Caleb pointed up and whispered, "It looks like my painting." I squeezed his hand, thinking of that framed watercolor leaning against our wall. Family, I realized, isn't measured by who shares your blood or who demands your silence. It's measured by who makes room for you to breathe, to speak, to grow. And sometimes, the bravest way to love your family is to walk away so you can finally come home. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.